Welcome to The Harvest. This is Carmel Fisher, and we are bringing you the capital market news, views, and clues. With me is Metamaterials Inc. President and CFO, Mr. Ken Rice. The ticker for Metamaterials is MMAT. Just to get straight into it, will you please give us a brief overview of Metamaterials?
Okay, Metamaterials is a public company on Nasdaq, as you mentioned. We focus on producing functional films that have nano patterns on them that cause light, radio waves, electromagnetic waves, and other forms of energy to behave differently than they do in nature. So if you've heard of the cloak of invisibility in Harry Potter, we can replicate that.
No way.
Yes. What we're able to do is, if you look at over history, the changes in science and technology have usually been driven by material science. So I talk to people about, we didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. We left the Stone Age because somebody discovered bronze and found out that it would make better tools and weapons than rocks. Well, if we look at what's happened over the last 50 years or so, we've gone from computer systems that would take out whole rooms to now things that can sit like your tablet and do a lot more with a lot less space. In fact, there's a series of rules called Moore's Law. It says the more and more and more things you can shrink, the faster and more production you can get out of stuff. And we're now in an age of what we describe as invisible materials. And what our materials do is we can take at a nanoscale, very, very small scale, put patterns on plastics or glass or other things. And when a light wave hits one of our products, it can reflect in a different way. It can filter. So for example, if you're an airline pilot and you're flying your plane and somebody aims a laser in your face, that laser is oftentimes green laser. And we make glasses for pilots that have a metafilm applied to them, and it reflects the green laser light, keeps the pilot safe, but doesn't change his visibility in any of the other color spectrums. Everything else looks exactly the same, but it keeps the laser light away from his eyes. We call that Meta Air. It's our first product. We made it in for the aerospace industry. So our focus is on applying these patterns to these functional films and then working with our customers to identify applications that are important to them. And so one could look at this as being driven by a number of megatrends in the industry. I'm sure you're familiar with 5G telephones, except if you have one now, it's probably 4G,
Right.
even though they say it's 5G. And the reason for that is actually pretty basic. 5G signals at their optimum are very, very high frequency, like millimeter waves. And the challenge that the industry faces today is when those signals are broadcast, they're usually absorbed by the first thing they hit. They don't actually get through the buildings or through the glass, except at very low frequency. So if you have 28 gigahertz of broadcast, by the time it gets into the building, it might be a third of that, which means you're at 4G or maybe even 3G plus.
Right.
So the promise of 5G isn't being met today, and the only way to meet it today is with more and more broadcast stations. That takes power, and they're ugly. So if you think about, so what our technology does in that indication is we can take a fully transparent piece of film. It looks just like clear plastic, but it's very flexible. That film has a pattern on it that will see the 5G signal and reflect it down. So it can, when it hits the building, it gets reflected down to the street, and you walking on the street can pick up the signal on your cell phone. Or if it hits a window and you want it to actually come into the space, our film can also, with a different pattern, act like a booster antenna and allow the signal to get through. And it's all passive and completely transparent. So it doesn't affect the look and feel of the building. Well, that application alone is probably worth $3 to $5 billion a year.
Wow.
We're working with a very large chemical company in Japan called Sekisui. They approached us about a year ago. This was public information.
Right.
And they said, we want to work with you. We have a very large telecom company in Japan as our customer. And the way they describe it is they basically want to enshroud the whole country of Japan in our film so that
Wow.
everywhere 5G is broadcast, it
Right.
can get through and into the buildings. We have other areas that we work in, for example, in consumer electronics. In your microwave in the kitchen,
Yes.
if you look through the door, it's very hard to see, right? Because all these wires in there.
Right.
The reason those wires are there is not to make it hard for you to see. It's to keep the electromagnetic radiation inside the microwave. Microwaves emit that kind of
Right.
radiation. So the reason those wires were put in the door in the first place was to retain the EMI. We had the world's largest producer of microwaves come to us about a year ago and say, we want you guys to make us a completely transparent door that still keeps the EMI inside the microwave. And we said, okay, fine. So we built this film, different pattern. In this case, the pattern's on the inside, and it reflects the signal back into the microwave.
Right.
And not only did we make the door completely transparent, but we also doubled the retention of EMI inside the microwave.
Wow.
And this company that we're working with makes 40 million microwaves a year.
Incredible.
So,
Can you speak more about the technology involved with that?
yeah. So it's hard to do without a picture, but if you think about what we do, we etch patterns onto the surface of plastic. So if you want a light wave to reflect, you basically make a shape on the surface of the plastic. So when the light hits it, it refracts differently. It reflects differently. There's a phenomenon in nature. I forget the name of I think it's a special butterfly that has the most incredibly gorgeous blue wings. Except there are no pigments in the wings.
Oh.
There's no color at all in the wings of this butterfly. If you look at those butterfly wings under an electron microscope, you'll see these nano patterns. And it's those patterns that cause the light to bounce around differently and create the colors. So we just bought a company called Nanotech Security. And Nanotech is in the business of producing highly specialized nano patterns on films that provide security to banknotes and to upscale brands. Mm-hmm. And on the banknote security side, they have those little strips that you see on the banknotes that if you twist them, you can
Right.
see a shape or a color or change.
Right.
Again, no ink. This is all done using patterns. In their case, it's multiple billions of holes that reflect the light a certain way. And they're all designed by a computer. So the technology that we have at the core is an understanding of how to design patterns and optimize them such that the material does what we want it to do. What's also important, however, is if you look at your cell phone today, the screen on your cell phone is conductive. It picks up your fingers. It's also made out of something called indium tin oxide as a coating. ITO is a rare earth metal. It's scarce. Mm-hmm. It's extremely expensive.
Right.
Can only source it in Asia. And it's brittle. So one of the reasons Samsung's first foldable phone didn't work was because of the ITO.
Right.
You folded it enough, it broke.
Huh.
And our material doesn't use any rare earth metals. It uses copper or aluminum or silver
Right.
or those kinds of things. They're done on plastics that are very, very, very malleable. We use about a tenth of the thickness of what's required for ITO today. And so the technology all came from, one way to think about it, it's all physics. And we have a lot of really smart engineers in our company that understand the physics of light and radio waves and electromagnetic waves. And what made me join the company I joined in December, mm-hmm. was that we're also working in the medical field. We have a couple areas that we work in. We work in imaging. We work in wireless sensing. In the imaging space, I spent a lot of my life doing diagnostic imaging and central nervous system disorders and cardiovascular things. And so when I found out first about Meta, I was very excited by what we were doing in the imaging space, because we have, using our films, we can cause a magnetic resonance image machine, MRI, to work at up to 40 times better performance than what you can see today with the technology. And we do that by applying our film to a special device that you just, if you're a patient, you put this device under your back and it modulates the frequency so that you get 40x, up to 40x, the improvement in signal. And you don't need to use a bigger magnet. You don't need to spend a lot of time in the machine. So we can take a scan that would today require an hour and a half, and do it in 10 or 15 minutes with resolution that's never been seen before.
Incredible.
It's
and
just
groundbreaking,
really amazing.
sounds
Yeah.
like it too.
We worked in breast cancer. In fact, the company was founded by our CEO to do non-ionizing radiation breast cancer screening. It uses microwaves to look at tissue, and what it does is it allows us to enable women that are, in their 20s to get scanned very quickly, easily, safely,
right,
establish a baseline
accurately,
and accurately, and track it over time,
right,
with no ionizing radiation. And again, it's one of these tools that if we see something in our scan that looks questionable, then we can say, go get a confirming scan, but you're only going to do that when you need to,
right,
as opposed to using it as a prophylactic. We also have the capability, using that same technology, to differentially diagnose strokes. So we have technology that we're developing that can be used in the ambulance to maximize this magic 3-hour window that TPA has to get on board with strokes. And then the other thing we do, which is really, really exciting, is we have technology in development now for completely non-invasive glucose monitoring with no needles. It takes advantage of the fact that we apply our Meta film to the device, and it makes the skin invisible.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, moving on to more of a corporate discussion. Can you touch some light on your two new leaders appointed within the company?
In the last 8 months, we've actually grown almost a complete C-suite.
Wonderful.
George Palikaris is our CEO and founder. Just a wonderful guy, really, really clever. We've added, since then, I joined in December. Dr. Jonathan Waldron joined at the same time as our Chief Technical Officer. Scott Richards joined as our Chief Marketing Officer. And we have Gardner Wade has joined as our Chief Product Officer. So we built out a C-suite in part to account for the fact that we are now a very different company than we were a year ago. When I joined in December, the market value of Meta was $30 million Canadian. Today, it's 1.6 billion
right.
US. That's a very different world,
Very
different
different
kind
world.
of company to run. So we're very excited about the new people, and we're not done.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be keeping our eye out on that. Give us a quick history on, as you mentioned, the change in the corporation, what you're growing towards, and also how the stock is affected.
Well, Meta, like most companies of our stage and size, we went public for the first time in Canada in March of 2020. We did that via a reverse triangular reorg with a company that was a shell in Canada. The goal was to get public on the Canadian Stock Exchange and then very rapidly migrate to Nasdaq. And then COVID came. So things slowed down a little.
Right.
So in the fall of last year, we were approached by a number of entities, actually, but the most aggressive of them in terms of opportunity and timing was a group called Torchlight Energy Resources. Torchlight was a company in Texas that was in the oil and gas business at a time when nobody wanted to be in the oil and gas business anymore. But what they had was fairly strong investors. They also had a Nasdaq listing that was clean, And so we negotiated with them a reverse merger that did two things. This is in our disclosures, but what we did was we negotiated a transaction that resulted in the metamaterials shareholders owning about 75% of the combined company post-merger, and the Torchlight shareholders owning 25% plus one other thing, which was the rights to receive whatever proceeds there were from the oil and gas assets that were still on their books at the time we closed. Meta will be completely focused on our main mission, which is the manufacture and distribution of metamaterials using sustainable materials, and will be a green company as a result.
What challenges did you guys face in terms of business operations?
Great question. The challenges we faced, being in Nova Scotia, was actually a good thing. Nova Scotia was there were 3 or 4 geographies in the world that were considered uber safe.
Right.
Nova Scotia was one of them. So we didn't have so much from a physical operation standpoint with COVID. We did a lot of things to protect our people, and we continue to do that. The biggest impact we saw and continue to see is in our supply chain. And that's a global issue, not just a Canadian issue. Our business requires that we order and install fairly complex pieces of equipment. We use a lot of lasers in our business. We use a lot of things that are high technology, rely a lot on computer chips, for example, and there's a global shortage of a lot of those things. So what we found, and we're just now starting to see a little bit more consistency and stability in that channel, but for a long time we couldn't predict when our vendors could supply to us. And that makes it really challenging to plan, especially in a business that tends to run fairly tightly.
A few closing remarks and perhaps touching on some growth strategies for our viewers and potential investors. What do you want them to take away from this?
Well, I'd like them to understand that we are very much an emerging growth company where our story is changing almost every hour. We're not done doing what we're doing. We intend to grow into our market cap. Our revenues don't match our market cap today,
They do.
but they will, and we're going to do that both organically and acquisitively.
Right.
We have an assembled group of people in our company that is really unrivaled. We have some really smart scientists, a lot of very good manufacturing people, especially with the NTS acquisition.
Right.
We as of now we have 120 people in the company. What we're proud of, aside from the technology base we have, is that across that 120 people, we have 23 languages spoken in the company.
Wow.
We have almost, I think our engineering mix is just about 50-50 men to women, which is remarkable. We're a green company, and we intend to grow the business quite a bit beyond where we are today.
Fantastic. Again, this was Mr. Ken Rice from Metamaterials Inc. with the ticker MMAT. I'm Carmel Fisher.